At the Mountains of Madness is a 1936 novella by the American horror fiction author H.P. Lovecraft. First written in 1931, it took 4 years for a publisher to consider it worth putting into print, but nowadays it's considered not only one of Lovecraft's best works, but also one of the greatest stories ever thrown up by the horror genre. This year, SP Books published a bespoke version of the original manuscript, concerning which, in the interests of full disclosure, I should state that I received a free copy in return for an impartial review. I don't normally accept such offers, but I was already familiar with the story, and I didn't think anything could go wrong. And spoiler alert, it didn't. I'll come back to that later. At the Mountains of Madness is a first-person account by a university professor of geology called William Dyer about a disastrous expedition he lately led to Antarctica. He's penning his account partly as a warning, because another expedition is about to set out. Put simply, what Dyer discovered at the South Pole were the remnants of a seemingly long extinct, highly intelligent species of creature that arrived on the Earth millions of years ago from elsewhere in the universe. Dyer finds its fossils and some writing, but it's not clear whether it was animal or vegetable or both. Shortly after its arrival, it was joined by unnameable evils in the form of 2 further extraterrestrial communities of creatures. Of course, Dyer discovers good reason to think that the evil hasn't gone anywhere. It's been lying dormant since the beginning of time, something which may be about to change, assuming it hasn't already. I can't really say any more without providing a spoiler, but in many ways the plot isn't the point. As with all the best horror stories, it's the atmosphere. Lovecraft's writing style is very formal by the standards of modern fiction, to the point where his publishers sometimes had to change his English spellings, but he also conveys a lingering sense of actual menace. I say actual menace. What brings his stories to life in that respect is that he always manages to produce the impression that this is the way the world we live in actually could be. There are 2 strands to that. Number 1, as far as I know, his writing doesn't draw on 19th century German philosophy, though I may be wrong about that. But there is one philosopher above all whose thought his work might almost have been written to illustrate. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in 1788 and died in Frankfurt at the age of 72. He'd been much impressed by a previous philosopher called Immanuel Kant, who claimed that we could only know things in the world as they appear to us. We couldn't know them as they are in themselves. To put it very crudely, Schopenhauer was much impressed by the prevalence of suffering in the world, the way nature is red in tooth and claw. And he proposed that ultimate reality, the thing that lies behind all the appearances, whatever else it might be, was, in the words of Stanford University's Encyclopedia of Philosophy, devoid of knowledge, lawless, absolutely free, entirely self-determining and almighty. There's something of this in Lovecraft, an incomprehensible horror lurking just below the surface. The second strand to Lovecraft is captured by 2 scientists, Adam Frank and Gavin Schmidt, in their 2018 thought experiment called the Silurian Hypothesis, named after a race of intelligent reptiles from Earth's distant past in a Doctor Who story. In a nutshell, Frank and Schmidt ask if there'd been an intelligent civilization on Earth millions of years ago, in the Jurassic period, say, would we ever be able to find any evidence of it? Wouldn't all of its artifacts have turned to dust by now? Given that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old and that humanity only appeared incredibly recently, that might seem like a good point. Lovecraft adds the disturbing possibility that any past civilizations could have originated elsewhere in the universe and might not be remotely humanoid. And of course, in At the Mountains of Madness, the word extinct might apply to them only in a very loose sense. As I said at the beginning, I was asked by SPL Books to review their new edition of At the Mountains of Madness. They told me it was a reproduction of Lovecraft's own handwritten manuscript, which struck me as interesting, although I wasn't sure how well something like that would sell, or whether it was actually a commercial proposition at all. In hindsight, I think I expected something like an ordinary hardback. As you can see, however, this is large and well bound and protected in its own sturdy slipcase. It's very expensive, but it's a limited edition print of 1,000 copies, and I'm pretty sure it's aimed at just two classes of customer: academic libraries above all, then Lovecraft fanatics. When I first flicked through it, it took me a while to realise that bits of it hadn't been printed upside down by accident. It turns out that Lovecraft, probably like many writers in those days, was in the habit of writing his stories on the backs of formal letters he'd received, which he turned upside down. One tends to forget that paper hasn't always been plentiful. As you might expect, this book gives a very good insight into Lovecraft's thinking processes. He frequently changed the story's little details to augment the impression of Dyer's scientific expertise. From the letters he wrote on, one often gets a picture of how Lovecraft himself was viewed by friends and acquaintances. The book itself comes with a long introduction by S.T. Joshi, an internationally recognised expert on the horror genre, and a shorter foreword by David Camus. Everything about this book breathes quality, even the feel of the paper. It's probably unaffordable for most private individuals, but it is a publishing achievement. At the risk of disrespecting it, however, the great thing is that not having a copy won't spoil your enjoyment of At the Mountains of Madness between any other covers.